The Regent's Reign, Chapter 13. A New Player. Arthur, Ellian, Leon, Lancelot, Percival, and Galahad set out before the hour was up. Gawain's trail was easy to follow. He'd bled quite a lot, but as the sun set, Arthur felt panic set in. Tracking in moonlight was difficult, but this venture had been so quickly tossed together that they didn't have enough supplies to be out here for too long. The trail by moonlight led them down the road the party that had left Camelot should have taken. They stopped a few hours before dawn to water and feed the horses. "What do you think happened? Bandits?" Galahad asked. Percival shook his head. "This doesn't feel like bandits. But it depends if the woman was in on it," Percival said. Leon lifted an eyebrow. "Why would the woman be in on it?" he asked, but Ellian shook his head. "No, that bit makes sense. Send in an innocent to lure out someone important enough to get attention or have information they wanted. Half of Camelot knows Merlin runs with the knights. If they don't know that, they'll have heard that Uther hasn't been seen in half a year. Word of his condition hasn't spread widely outside the castle, but the physician's apprentice would know how he's doing." Ellian reasoned. Arthur swore softly, burying his head in his hands. If what Ellian guessed was true, then this was his fault. "It's not your fault, Arthur," Lancelot said. "Merlin chooses her own path in life, and she has chosen you, despite whatever dangers that may include. If you try to break off what you have built with her to protect her, she's likely to cuff you around the head and throw herself into the next danger that crosses her path for spite alone." He pointed out, and Arthur laughed lightly. You do know her well, don't you, Lancelot?" he said, looking up. Lancelot shrugged. "As well as anyone," he said, and Arthur shook his head. "That is an excellent way of putting it." Picking up a stick, Arthur poked at the small fire they'd built. "Merlin is a difficult person to know. I met her near 5 years ago now, and I don't know that even I know everything about her." The others raised eyebrows at him. Ellian, though, nodded. "She's a bit odd. Nothing bad about it, but there's something about her. I don't know that there's a word for it," he said, shaking his head. "I've been looking for a word for it for 5 years, Ellian. Save yourself the time. Give it up. I'm beginning to believe there isn't a word for Merlin's oddity. It's part of what I love about her." Arthur admitted, and Lancelot and Leon exchanged a glance. Percival scratched his chin, but remained silent. They found the site of the ambush the next morning. It was hard to miss. There were 6 dead men there, after all. Following the trail back to the ruin was easier still. They'd hardly been subtle, and at least one of them had been injured. Arthur couldn't help but pray that it wasn't Merlin's blood. By the time they reached the fortress, though, they found something wrong. People were fleeing. Several were emaciated and showed signs of whippings. A few of them caught sight of the red of the knights' cloaks and cried out in joy. Arthur frowned, pulling his horse to a stop as he spotted the woman who'd come to Camelot begging for assistance. She was holding 2 young children, a boy and a girl. She collapsed to her knees before his horse, begging for forgiveness. "Where is Merlin?" he demanded. The woman shook her head. "I don't know, sire. They separated us when they threw me in a cell with my children. They swore they wouldn't hurt my kin if I did what they said. I am sorry." "How are you here now if you were tossed in a cell?" Leon asked. "There was a phantom. A figure I saw only for a moment. She broke all our chains with a wave of her hands," the woman said. The girl in her arms nodded. "She had pretty golden eyes," the child said, and all the knights stiffened. "What did she look like?" Leon asked as they dismounted and drew weapons. I did not see her clearly. She wore a cloak and a mask, the woman said. Elian's eyes darted around the emptying courtyard. There, he called, pointing. The figure was at the edge of the courtyard, wearing a bark brown cloak that looked as though it was of druid make. She had a black veil that covered the lower half of her face, and the moment she knew herself to be spotted, she took off into the castle, the knights racing after her. The corridor she had raced down ended in a massive broken window. She stopped at the sill, and the knights halted feet away. Leon, Lancelot, and Percival brought up the rear. Elian, Arthur, and Galahad at the front of the small formation. 6 against 1. But when that one was a sorceress, that number rarely mattered. But she did not strike out at them. Halt! In the name of the King of Camelot, you are arrested, Arthur called, and the figure tilted their head to the side. Then they spoke. The voice was unlike anything Arthur had ever heard, echoing and rolling as though traveling around a massive cavern. For the crime of freeing those imprisoned here, she asked. For the crime of magic within the bounds of Camelot, Arthur called back, none of them advancing. The figures shook their head. A crime I had no choice in. You would do well to learn what you fear. If you did, you might not fear it so, Uther Pendragon. With that pronouncement, the figure leaped onto the windowsill and out the glassless window. The knights ran to the window in time to see her vanish mid-air in a swirl of cloak and wind.